Okay, thank you, everyone. We're going to start with our luncheon keynote. Patrick Sheehan, who's Director of the Office of Energy for the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Thanks very much, Patrick, for taking the time out of your day and your schedule to come down here and join us. We very much appreciate the leadership that the Office of Energy, the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and Commissioner Adam Putnam has taken in energy policy and the energy industry here in Florida. Recently, as you can see in the bio that's up here on the screen, the Office of Energy has been in a couple of different areas, but most recently was taken on by the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and they've really done a great job in giving priority to this issue, giving priority to this industry, and seeing it as an opportunity for Florida, not just for a way to save money, but a way to provide economic development to help support our agriculture industry, as we talked about earlier today, as well as manufacturing in a number of other areas. So we're very excited about that. Patrick is a recent Floridian. He is spent quite a bit of time in Washington, D.C., working with the Pentagon in a number of areas, as well as a number of different posts on Capitol Hill. And appropriate for an Air Force town is in Air Force Brad. Spent quite a bit of time all around the world with the Air Force and has quite a lot of experience in sort of the strategic side of the energy business and why these things are important from a big picture global perspective. So thank you very much, Patrick, for being here. I'll just hand you the mic here. You can just put it right on and take it away. And feel free, if you either sit, stand, whatever you want to do. It's going to be pretty informal, I think, a short presentation and some Q&A. And thanks very much, everybody.
We want to wrap up at 2, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to save some time for Q&A. I appreciate it, Mike. Thanks very much. As Mike pointed out, I'm not really a new Floridian. I am a military brat, that's true. My dad was here back in the early 80s, mid-80s, I guess it's fair to say, at MacDill Air Force Base. So I got to do my junior high years and start high school in Tampa. My dad was in MacDill. In fact, it's actually a good segue, because I wanted to lead off by saying I was so disappointed as a new director last year not to make the symposium. And I'm really thrilled to be here this year, in part because for me, maybe because I'm an Air Force brat, maybe it's because the first toy my dad ever put in my hand was a Saturn V rocket made out of plastic, or a book on astronauts as one of the first books I ever had. But this place has always been very special to me, the Space Coast. Even though I haven't lived here all my life or even worked here, this has been really a place for me that I look at, like many of you do, as a leader in innovation, but more profoundly, it's really the home of our own national heroes. And when I was a kid in the 80s, first moving to Tampa, Florida, I was really excited to come here because I knew that this is where the manned space program had started in the 60s. This is where the shuttle program was going on. And in my clutches as we moved into our home in Brandon, I had sort of three prized possessions. One was that Saturn V rocket that Dad gave me when it was just a Titan. One was a book on the astronauts, which I refer to. But also 4 pictures that my dad had just gotten signed and autographed by the early crop of shuttle astronauts. Prior to coming to MacDill, he was at the Air War College. Many of you know where that is. That's up the road in Alabama and the Montgomery area. And he had spent 2 weeks out here. And he was chaperoned around, or his class was chaperoned around by Bob Crippen. And many of you know that Bob was the co-pilot with John Young on the first space shuttle Columbia mission. And so I was very proud to have a pic of them, the official pic, signed by both John Young and Bob Crippen on my wall. And right next to it were 3 guys I'd never heard of. But they went on to great acclaim and have also become great symbols of the true heroic nature of the folks that have worked here, either sitting in those craft going to the heavens or working so diligently to make that effort a reality. And those guys were, again, many of you probably know him. Dick Gregory, who went on to become a senior leader at NASA, one of the highest ranking African Americans in NASA, who flew on some missions. Carl J. Bobko, who had actually gone up in the Apollo era, but also was slated to go up in some shuttle missions, and I think he did. And then finally, there was another guy who I didn't know about, but we've all come to know and all revere as a hero, and that was Dick Scobie. And those pictures hung over my wall in the mid-'80s when I was a kid in Brandon, and so excited to be in the state that was the home of this venture into the heavens, the venture forth to our destiny as I saw it, and you know, taking aloft with them all of our dreams for something bigger and better. And to me, when I look back on it, and I look back on some of these things that Mike was pointing out that I've done, it becomes all more profound what has happened in this location, in the Space Coast, because of the time that took place, the era that it took place. You know, we're talking, I was a 12-year-old in the 80s, and for 20 years, 2 decades, we'd had this manned space program. And if you think about what was happening geopolitically, economically, socially, between the civil rights movement, between the Vietnam divide within our country, the post-Vietnam era struggles to figure out what we wanted to be as a country, the Cold War freezing and then thawing and then refreezing again into the 80s. This was a profound time of turbulent change, of turbulent winds of change. And of course, some of you rock and roll fans will remember that soon thereafter, we had the Scorpion song, The Winds of Change, that sort of reflected on all the change that had happened between the 60s and the 70s and the 80s as Gorbachev came in. And in my mind, the profundity, if you will, of what happened here was that we showed ourselves as Americans, and we showed the world that we don't have to let turbulent winds of change buffet us around, or, as they might say, NASA, stall our craft on the launch pad and delay the launch. What it really represented was the fact that we could take those winds of change, harness them, and use them to drive us forward towards our destiny, towards our future aspirations for progress, not just for ourselves as a nation, but really for all mankind. And that, I think, in many ways, is something that continues to happen. We continue to see change and winds of change. And in this era, we probably feel that the winds of change are much more conflicting, that the winds may be going in cross patterns, and we're not sure what's happening. When we look at the economic situation globally or the geopolitical situation today, it's far less clear than it was back in the 60s and 70s in the Cold War era. It's far more challenging. Are we moving into a multipolar world? Are we going to be in a unipolar world for a long time? What should we be doing as a country? What are our responsibilities in the way of leadership? At the same time, we're dealing with economic struggles. And then I look at where we are in Florida. We have so many of those same challenges here today. We have challenges you know very well in the Space Coast area, trying to figure out economically what our future role will be, how we can continue to inspire and lead and grow our economy, but also look beyond that to the dreams and aspirations of our generation and those that will come after us, like that of my little 2-year-old son. These winds of change have been harnessed before, and they've been harnessed here, and we've used them to propel us to great things. I think if you were to talk to my boss, Commissioner Putnam, he would say that is what we must always remember during turbulent times, during times of confusion, during times of uncertainty. We need to understand that we can continue to use those winds of change to propel us forward. And there's probably no better place to remind ourselves of that than here in the Space Coast of Florida. I think one of the ways that we're doing that is by having concerted efforts like you see here, that Mike and his group have been at the forefront of, which is to try to find new ways to make the Space Coast that inspirational leader, that innovative leader, that economic force for progress for Florida, for the nation, ultimately, again, for mankind. And energy and the opportunities in energy are clearly going to be a key component of that. Now, if you look at where we are with energy, I think one of the things that's very interesting is you can almost take that wind of change metaphor and the maybe conflicting or uncertainty about the directions of those winds and apply that very much to the landscape of energy. A lot of you guys have probably read many of the same books that my staff and I have read that have just come out in the last couple of years. And at a recent conference in West Palm, I kind of read the back flaps of a lot of those books to show the various different takes on what's going on with energy and where are we going to go with energy. And they're so vastly different. I'm not going to bore you reading all of those flaps because I don't think it went over too well with the last audience. But the titles in and of themselves tell you a lot. You know, there's a recent book that talks about the conundrum. We are literally dealing with so much information coming from so many areas in the energy sphere that it's almost a conundrum. What do we do with it? Where are we going to go? Are we going to have a resurgence of fossil fuels and we're going to kind of double down our bets on that? Or are we going to go with the advancements that are made in the renewable energy area and make sure that we're harnessing those opportunities? That particular author's view was we're facing a conundrum as a nation, maybe globally, as to what we need to do and what we can do. I think my personal favorite book, and the one that I gave my boss, although he didn't really comment on it, was Energy for Future Presidents. I thought maybe you'd be interested in that one. I think he read that one. What I took away from that one was an attempt to try to assess all of the different things that are literally going at almost the speed of light in the energy world. Again, the tremendous change that has come about because of the utilization of the fracking technology to exploit our own gas opportunities in the shale plays, not just in Pennsylvania and Ohio, but now in Texas and in North Dakota and other places. And then you extrapolate further using the same technologies to get tight oil supplies and unconventionals. He looks at the issue of methane hydrates that the Japanese have just started to look at and are trying to harness. Talks about the offshore drilling in Brazil to, again, find seemingly untappable or harder to retrieve petroleum sources and bring those to bear. We hear about it all the time. You just have to pick up the papers and see there's rampant speculation about what this means. One of the profound questions that in this book the author tries to address is how do we make that work with the need to diversify our energy supplies? And that has been Commissioner Putnam's outlook on his mission as the leader of our energy office and energy policy in Florida. And that is to try to find a way to make sure we have stable supplies of energy for our needs in Florida, reliable supplies, stable meaning affordable, reliable meaning continuous, so that we don't ever have to anticipate brownouts or shortages, even with the natural disasters that we frequently face and interruptions. And then diversified supply so that we don't put ourselves in a position that we were in as a nation in the 70s with an over-reliance, almost complete dependence on petroleum for transportation. And we're looking at that both in the power generation sector as well as in the transportation sector, as we need to, because energy is key to both. But the overwhelming consensus, if you would say there is a consensus, is that in some way we need to tap into all of these energies. Will the boom in the shale gale price out, if you will, or make uncompetitive renewables for some amount of time? We don't know. We have to continue to look at that. We have to assume that will be a factor. But does that mean that we give up on the idea of a diversified portfolio and say the fossil fuels are the answer, full stop? I don't think anybody that we have seen out there talking about this issue in a common sense manner, in a fulsome manner, has drawn that conclusion. And we haven't either. There is space for all of these technologies. There's space for more technologies. There's space for more innovation. There are some fascinating ideas that are out there that some of the books that I haven't mentioned talk about. And they are seemingly at the precipice of being ready to deploy, depending on who you talk to. Piezoelectric energy, where you can have moving sidewalks, moving roads that are, you know, powered in part by the energy that we put forward as human beings just walking along them, or we put forward by driving our cars or bicycles or Teslas, as I just had a chance to drive out in the parking lot. Thank you very much for allowing me to do that. That's fascinating, and we don't know. We're just on the precipice. We're trying to figure out where that can take us. Using body heat, using human body heat to generate power enough to power those technologies that we're also darn dependent on now. Our iPads, our iPods, our phones, you know, as we become more and more dependent on these things, we're going to have to find more and more ways to ensure that we can supply the power to that. Right up above us, sadly, we have to give Georgia a little credit here. They are trying to take the age-old notion that solar power comes from the sun, and we have a natural model for that in photosynthesis in nature. And while some are pursuing solar panels that will be conical and shaped like flowers or like plants to try to maximize the efficiency that we can gain out of it, the guys in Georgia are actually trying to extract electricity out of plants. It seems sci-fi. I mean, to me, it seems sci-fi. But they have run some tests and said that they can do it at a very small scale, and now the challenge is to take it to scale. So innovation will continue to be there, and what we have to do, I think, as policymakers is make it very clear that this state is open to diversification, is more than open, is favoring diversification, because we don't want to become overly dependent on any one source that could challenge us economically or lead to problems with stability and reliability. And more to the point, we have to continue to foster the ideas that many folks are just now bringing to the fore that could be part of that diversification. Let me take a few minutes to talk about what we have tried to do using that mantra of stable, reliable, and diversified energy for Florida in the last 18 months or so that we've had this charter. I think Mike alluded to this. Commissioner Putnam felt very strongly that one of the challenges in Florida was, while there was all this national and global debate about where are we with energy, we seem to have grown silent on this point within Florida. We have seemed to run into some almost unsurmountable obstacles, maybe politically and other ways that didn't allow for a fulsome discussion of our energy policy in Florida. I think it has been quoted by others that maybe it's been 4 or 5 years since we've seen a comprehensive energy bill. That's one measure of obviously of the kind of level of conversation or dialogue we're having on this. So it's very important to Commissioner Putnam to take the opportunity to seize the initiative and to start putting some markers out on where we want to go with energy policy, what we think the appropriate role of government is in supporting stable, reliable, and diverse energy supply. And we had to do that legislatively. But the goal was not simply getting some good components to that legislation. It was also to show policymakers themselves and stakeholders who inform the policymakers and all Floridians that we are serious about making policy, we can make policy, we can continue to move forward on this difficult but profoundly necessary issue of energy. So I think on that score, we feel very good that HB 7117, as it passed almost unanimously through the House and the Senate and then became law, achieved that secondary goal, if you will, of saying we can do energy policy here. We're also very proud of the small provisions within each one, and the Commissioner will be the first to say, and some of you have heard us say this before, that it was necessarily modest in scope. It was wide in scope. We touched a lot of different issues and sent signals, we hope, positive signals on each of these issues, but it didn't get deep into each issue and try to over-legislate too early, because I think one of the things you've got to do in order to lead, if you will go back to the metaphor of being in front of the winds of change, I think we can also extrapolate from the programs that have run so successfully from this part of the country and understand that you don't just have a bold vision and a bold goal and say we're going to be there tomorrow. You have to take the steps, the smart, well thought out steps to get there. NASA's probably one of the best examples. You know, if you think about the Apollo missions, they didn't go to the moon on the first shot. They didn't give up when they had the fire early on. They redoubled their efforts, and they went back to making sure that each stage of the process was well thought out, lessons were learned, extrapolated, and then used for the next stage. And each stage built on the last stage to get us to the moon. And that's what, in a way, we are trying to replicate with our attempts to lead on energy policy. Take incremental steps, making sure we learn lessons, share them with one another, have an open dialogue about what should be the lessons we extrapolate from those, and then continue to move forward. The Commissioner has used the metaphor of getting the band together and then keeping them together. It's not easy. I mean, I don't know how many state legislatures have passed any kind of energy bill unanimously that attempted to cover a number of issues. So what did we try to do? We did an EV charging station rule that said that if you are an owner of a restaurant, a hotel, or a utility, you can't do that under Florida law. We think the dividends that will come from that are going to be incalculable over time, especially if we all drive these Teslas around. And I hope that's the case soon. Yeah, I was under the speed limit. But we try to do some other things too. We try to say we need a comprehensive understanding of what kind of biomass we have here. We know that ag in this state is a $100 billion industry. And we have a lot of land that can be used that is not used all during the seasons that could be used to generate biomass. But first, in talking with the Forestry Service, we had to figure out what do we really have. We have federal studies, but they are not as granular as we'd like them to be. So we employed the latest technology and said we want to have a GIS-based company come in and say, what do we really have here in Florida? What is potential, and what do we have already? So we have a full understanding of where we are. We also looked at some other things in the area of incenting or giving tax breaks to those folks who are already trying to put into place biofuel operations and sell some of this product to you, or looking at producing energy, electricity, in this case, power, from a renewable source, regardless of what that source may be. And we extended some tax credits for 5 years that had been in operation in Florida, that had been oversubscribed in most cases, but we're still in the early stages of getting these industries moving forward into a larger, or representing a larger proportion of our energy supply. There were added provisions that the legislature added. One of them was to return local control, or add to the local control or the local ability to control this dialogue in energy, and say any locality can have a referendum to decide whether or not they want to have their own incentives, their own support for renewable energy. And then there were provisions that required my office to do more in the way of supplying information that was relevant to policymakers and Floridians for the future. One of which is already commanding quite a bit of our attention, and that is building a clearinghouse that captures the lessons learned from the 4 years of the stimulus program that our office and our state has been challenged with, and I think has effectively managed to a near conclusion, because those stimulus dollars, that $175 million that we received from the Department of Energy about 4 years ago, has now gone out to 151 grantees, and on September 30th, we're effectively done with those programs. And there are so many programs, I don't want to name one and forget too many, but I have to, out of pride and also in deference to our host, I do want to mention the UCF effort that we had that we're very proud of. And that was a $10 million project to make sure that schools throughout the state could have 10 kilowatt systems, solar systems, placed at their school to do three things. One, cut their bills a little bit and provide a little power. Two, provide a real living educational tool to the students and to some of those teachers that we've had a chance to meet who are so passionate about science and trying to get the kids more passionate about science. And give them something to look at and something to touch and something to test, along with a curriculum that teaches them more about physics and mathematics. And then the third thing that this project really does, I really think it's a triple play, is it allows those schools to have a backup system of power as they serve as emergency shelters in our communities. If you can get a double play in any kind of investment from any level of government, that's a great thing. If you can get a triple play, I think we should be quite ecstatic mutually. So we have great thanks for the UCF for generating this idea. I think Phil, we heard is 110 schools now that are covered through that program throughout the state. We're somewhere up above 100 now. I know.
It's very close to 110, and there's some more that are coming online.
Yeah.
Basically, the program allows us to leverage a number of programs, so it's actually free.
Yeah, and I think all we've heard from the schools is we want more. We want to do more. There's more schools who want to do it. So that's one example of what we try to do with the grant program that's now coming to its natural conclusion, statutory conclusion. So what are we going to do in the future? 2 seconds on that. We are going to be in the position to have a new rebate program, as the legislature this last session passed a fairly remarkable bill that said we want to see more CNG usage in our transportation area. We want diversification of fuel supply in transportation. And so a coalition was formed just up the road in Jacksonville, led by the beer wholesalers, Florida Natural Gas Association, UPS, others joined in, and successfully got a $6 million a year rebate program structured to help fleet-based operations find a way to pay the marginal difference in cost between a diesel-based fleet or vehicle in their fleet and a CNG version of that. There's also, as part of that legislation, a 5-year tax break for those CNG stations that will naturally crop up to service those fleets. That's important, and that's a big step, and our office is looking forward to the challenge of handling that rebate program. But I think, as the commissioner would say, it's more a reminder that when we said last year we want to continue the dialogue and continue to see energy as a priority, we can look to things like the CNG rebate and say the legislature has embraced that and is continuing to come up with ideas on how we can achieve that. A couple other areas we're very, very focused on. One is, if you've met with the commissioner or seen him speak, he will tell you that the number one resource issue in his mind in Florida is water and water conservation. We are actively exploring ways we can link energy use, water use, couple those efforts to be more efficient in the use of water and energy, and make sure that those ideas or those two critical resources are linked in terms of our focus and in terms of our support and activity. Another area that we're going to be focused on is rural energy use and audits on rural farms and landowners' holdings throughout Florida. This is an idea that's come about, actually came about quite some time ago. The USDA has money for this, but it has not really been overly subscribed or even heavily utilized in Florida. We want to see that change, and we're working with the Farm Bureau and others to make that happen. One of my key staffers on that, Gail Stafford, I am going to out you, she's here, she is working on that. And so if anybody's interested in what we're thinking about on rural energy audits and saving energy for our landowners, please see Gail or I about that, because we are actively building that program right now. We just signed the grant with the USDA the other day. So those are a couple of things we're looking at. I think of interest to many of you here is how we're going to use some of the money, the stimulus money that didn't get spent. And I'll just tease you with one and tell you to go to the website to see the rest, because there's at least 7 different programs that we're going to do, or we can do it in Q&A. We are going to do what I think is rightfully looked at as the first matching fund program in the energy or space or arena, meaning a first time that the state of Florida has a dedicated matching fund pool that entrepreneurs and others, universities, can tap into when they apply for federal grants or private opportunities. And you all know very well that the match requirements for those are continuing to go up in many cases in terms of how much money the feds or private entities are expecting a state or locality to put forward. We haven't been able to support as a state those activities beyond just a letter of support. And that doesn't get you too far anymore when we're competing against so many other innovative companies across the country. So we're putting a multi-million-dollar project out on the street here this summer that effectively says, if you got a good idea and you're applying for a grant from the DOE or DOD or USDA, talk to us. We will give you an IOU, and if you win that grant up at the federal level, you can cash in that IOU and you've got some matching funds. We think that's important. We've heard from numerous people about it, some in this room, and I think that has helped us come to some conclusions about what we can be doing with some of that leftover money. So I know I just kind of, it's a perfect point for me to end, getting two claps, and turn it over to you guys for questions, because I've just very briefly kind of skimmed the surface, if we have time.
Oh, we absolutely have time. So we'll open up for questions, and please, Scott.
Yeah, the matching grant is really a very sorely needed thing, not just across this, but expanded to DOD and all the other government competitions, because the other states are playing and we're not. All right, so I'm glad to see you do it. 16 states.
16 other states.
16 now, yeah.
The one thing we need, though, is velocity, because a lot of times these things happen. The date from the RFP to the time we got to submit, you guys got to turn this thing around in like 2 weeks or something, or we're not going to make it,
Right.
So is that going to be in the mechanism there to kind of vet these quickly and
Yes.
top them out?
Yes, we're going to try to work expeditiously on that, because we do understand the pressures. I mean, we have to deal with a lot of these agencies ourselves, and we know the pressures that put you under, not just the paperwork pressures, but the time constraints. So I don't want to violate the number one rule that my boss has, which is giving people false hope or setting expectations too high and not meeting them. We're going to underpromise and overdeliver, hopefully, as he likes to say, and say that we're going to try to roll this program out this summer and do our best to make it a quick turnaround in terms of applications. Sir?
Did I hear you say that it's open to universities as well?
At this point, we haven't unveiled it. If you have some ideas, we can always modify, but
There are programs on the books right now for matching funds for universities, like the Florida High Tech Corridor and stuff like that. So they sort of have some of their things, and matching funds requirements for universities are a little bit different than they are for private, because the government thinks that universities are not in the business of commercializing.
Right.
So we have a higher bar to go over, so I just hate to split high with universities when we already have other ways to get it. That would just be my 2 cents. It's also worth 2 cents.
no, it's more valuable than 2 cents. It's a very good point. I think, broadly speaking, like one of the other programs I didn't talk about, the bioenergy R&D grant, where we required a university to marry up with the private sector. We did that because the commissioner felt like when it comes to R&D, if the government is going to provide support, whatever level of government, but in this case we're talking about the state, we need to feel like we can explain to Floridians that the lessons learned and extrapolated, not just simply the benefits, but the lessons learned can be shared as much as legally allowed. We don't want to get into intellectual property rights, but in this way we have an opportunity with our academic community and groups like the Florida Solar Energy Center, or the FESC, the Florida Energy Systems Consortium, to really, I don't want to say nascent, but some of the emerging dialogue, cross-dialogue within our state university system to make sure that these lessons are shared as much as they can. Again, there will be the technical, very important legal proprietary issues. We don't want to force people to have to divulge very important IP, but we do want to make sure that in some way the universities can be part of the process so that some of that assistance will potentially be able to be shared around the state in a different way. But we're very open to continuing to dialogue about it. We want to get this out fast, but if people have an overwhelming sense that we may be duplicating things, we would love to talk more about that.
Well, it's just, universities obviously can team with the private enterprise to make the package much stronger. The private enterprise really just wants to get a product out and
Yeah.
push the ball down the field. Universities' metric really should be, right, educating their students and doing fundamental research. And those tend not to become products, and so they have a little bit different mission than the industry. And so to me, they should be treated slightly differently.
Yeah, I understand that.
I think
And I think
they're doing a little bit too much of making my universities like confusing universities and business. They're very different. They have two different metrics. They have two different goals in the world. And by treating them the same, maybe
Put us in competition.
it adds to that problem. Puts us in competition with.
That's a great point. And clearly one of the things that is challenging across the country, not just here, are these valleys of death in different spots when you're trying to take a product from conception to the marketplace. And I have not touched on all of the federal stimulus dollars that we spent, but some of those went into efforts to utilize the power of venture capital and sent them to get into the energy space and really cross that one valley of death to get it into the commercial space after you've done the R&D and you've done some demonstration, get it into the commercialization mode, which is a heavy lift and is still something the US DOE is trying to address. So I think maybe the better way to put it is we think that in our broader portfolio of different things that we have done, either with stimulus monies or now these newer programs that are going to use unused stimulus dollars, we've tried to tackle a lot of those different issues. Again, the bottom line is there's still time to modify this and shape it, and I think it's only fair to say that we probably have enough time to more fully vet this with folks who have differing opinions. So we'll make an appointment to talk some more. I think we already do have an appointment.
Two more questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Chris Castro. I appreciate you coming out.
Absolutely, happy to be here.
Yeah, as we kind of ramp up our diversity of energy throughout the state of Florida, there's going to be a huge need for workforce and a big gap that needs to be filled.
Yeah.
So, what is the Office of Energy doing in the state of Florida to help make these vocational and workforce development programs affordable for students coming out of the university who oftentimes don't have the full-time jobs or whatever it means to do in order to get them that market entry or entry-level job?
It's an excellent question. If you allow me, my answer is going to be a little bit broader in that one of the things that we've heard from, again, folks in this audience and others is that there are groups ready to hire engineers and technically certified folks in different areas in the clean energy space. I think you can go to the DEO here in Florida and see they have a map of what they classify as clean energy companies in Florida that are already here. And it's very interesting, as I go around the state and talk to the commissioner, you find out that a lot of the community colleges and a lot of the larger universities don't seem to know where those companies are, and there hasn't been this simple, what would seem to be fairly simple overlay of maps of here's where the brain power is and here is where the jobs are. Nothing against Georgia Tech, where my father-in-law went to school, or Virginia Tech, where I've got great friends, but we don't, as a state, necessarily want to see all of our companies have to go to those places to get the guys and gals who are going to do the next innovative energy-related activity here. So we're looking at how we can be a conduit for that kind of dialogue. There are different ideas that are out there. We have not picked one yet. We're open to discussion about it. On the financing of education, I don't know, quite frankly, that the Office of Energy, other than proposing some policies, has any money to bear there. So I don't know that we could start a scholarship program, for instance, which I'd love to do. But we do need to look at how we can help in the larger context of the larger debate within the state, help add that as a component to the STEM debate that's already on and how we make that more affordable going forward. I give credit to the governor. He talks about the cost of education frequently. It's an important point. It's one of the points that's, you know, as a father of a 2-year-old kid, I'm already thinking about trying to scrape the pennies together to get him to college. I guess he's going to the Air Force Academy. At least granddad wants him to. But we need to look at that within that context. I don't know that the Office of Energy is rightfully the vanguard to just lead a sort of solitary effort there. We need to merge it in with the larger debate about how we get folks affordable education, specifically in the STEM area, the broader STEM area. Yeah. But I'm happy to talk with you some more about it. Thanks for coming.
Unfortunately, we are right at time, and we can have a discussion with Dr. Sheehan, with Patrick afterward, for those who are interested.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate
Appreciate it.